Welcome students, you clicked on this video because you, I'm guessing, want to learn how to build beautiful trees like these. As nostalgic as the Minecraft trees are, they aren't going to cut it for that new house or custom forest you've been wanting to build. Also, custom trees are a great way to spruce up your Minecraft survival worlds.
We wanted to create this comprehensive guide based on our method to find inspiration and build many types of trees. We have struggled for many years building custom trees, and ours are definitely not the best, but we hope that this video can narrow down any concerns or questions you have about building trees.
First, before you start placing blocks in Shift, you gotta know what kind of tree you're going to build. You have 73,000 different options and 9,000 options no one even knows about. That's too many options. Picking the right tree isn't too hard, so don't be intimidated. Ask yourself, what biome are you in? What vibe do you want? A dense, dark, scary forest, or one solitary, epic tree? For example, here in my survival world, I knew I wanted to build a pine forest. And since there are still around 134 different species of pine, we still have to narrow that down further. How I personally do it is by going outside, walking around, or doing some research in your local community to see what kind of trees you got in your area. Doing this helps make your world more personalized and it's fun. I know a lot of you guys don't go outside. Yes, I'm looking at you.
For our world, we chose Jeffrey Pine because we've spent a lot of time hanging out in the Lake Tahoe Basin, and it's the most common pine, and an appropriate height for our world. Speaking of size, scale matters a lot. If your builds tend to be on the smaller side, you're gonna want a smaller tree. Good thing, like Aiden said, you have 73,000 different options. An example would be, instead of choosing the Jeffrey pines, since they tend to be huge, you could do something like Torrey pine, a much smaller pine, but would still make for a great build because of its dynamic branches.
Okay, once you've got your tree, take some reference pics. If you don't have any trees, just use the internet. We're going to use these reference pictures a lot. Now it's time to come up with the block palette. We tend to enjoy using a wide variety of blocks because trees have a lot of different colors. Take this Jeffrey pine. If we just look at the picture, it just looks like a tree. But if you look closely, there are all types of different colors being created from the shadows casted by the branches, etc. For the trunk, you might want to go with the type of block that has a wall, fence, trapdoor, all that good stuff, because they add a ton of shape, which is very important. Okay, one last thing before you get started building. Location is something you're going to keep in mind, especially if it's going to be complementing a building or the main focal point. You don't want the tree to be blocking a really nice house you built because it'll be blocking a point of interest. On the other hand, you use trees to force the eyes to a certain point. Take this waterfall example. I built the cliffs a long time ago, and honestly, at the time, I didn't really like them much. But I really did like the waterfall. I used the whole Jeffrey Pine forest to completely hide the cliffs and focus your eyes when you're walking down the path onto the waterfall. Okay, a little disclaimer before I start building. Bean and I don't use World Edit or Axiom, we only use Limatica. Pull up your reference picture and let's get started. I'm going to be building a Jeffrey Pine since we have gotten a lot of people asking about them in our survival series. After that, I'll be building a coastal oak and Bean will be building an aspen. First, we build the trunk. In my opinion, most types of pines are more beginner friendly since they do not require many branches. Something like a noble fir would be more challenging because of the mass amount of leaves and branches. I start with darker blocks like tuff and acacia since there would be the most shade at the bottom. Scale the height according to your world. I tend to go around 30 to 40 blocks tall with these pines since the leaves start higher up. You would of course go different heights for different trees. When I get close to the desired height, I narrow the trunk using walls and fences. Then I just add a bit of branches using trapdoors and fences. Not too many, because these trees tend to be clustered somewhat close together in a forest, and having too many branches could be too much. Now time for the leaves. For pine trees, it's quite simple. I spam. On the bottom layer, I go pretty wide, making almost a block of 70% birch and 30% spruce. I usually tend to go back and circle my way around the tree, trimming and adding more leaves, taking the cube of leaves and making it round. Then for the next layer of leaves, I like to go up one block in between sections. You want to do the same thing, pretty much making each layer as you go up slightly smaller on random sides. When you get to the wall portion of the trunk, just surround the wall in azalea or any brighter leaves. This gives the indication from sunlight hitting the tops of the trees. I usually don't have sections of leaves here, just random placements, but still leaving a lot of air. I like to add some leaves on the top of the fence to make the tree a little more pointy. Now for the finishing touches, I add blackstone buttons for the illusion of knots, and a beehive and maybe some turtle eggs in the branches. Now, if your pine tree is looking a little silly, that's okay, because a forest consists of all different types and shapes of different trees. The more variation of the trees, the better. For example, when building my Survival Worlds forest, I used the same base design and block palette, but I varied the tree height, trunk girth, and leaf density. Some trees look better than others, and that's normal. Trees are funny looking and sometimes majestic. That's just how it works. We will touch on what makes a good forest later on in the lesson. Bean and I recently did a field trip out to some coastal oaks in the California bushland or chaparral, or whatever you want to call it. We were instantly inspired and we knew we had to build one of these huge girthy guys. First, like always, we start with a reference picture. Since these trees tend to be pretty big with a pretty big canopy, just like building the pine, we're going to go with some darker blocks near the bottom to give the effect that the area is shaded. I'm using mahogany bark and oak bark for the base and spruce stairs and slabs to kind of smooth out the roots. The shape for the trunk for these types of trees can be pretty tough to nail, but like I said, trees are funny looking and they're far from perfect. I make the base thicker as I go up, around 6 to 7 blocks, and I make it marginally thinner as I ascend. Once I get the shape I'm happy with, I begin on the limbs and branches. We will make it taller soon, I just tend to find it easier to add the branches in height slowly. Branches can be done in so many ways. I tend to use spruce because it has all the slabs, stairs, etc. Get creative in the way you combine the stairs, trapdoors, and slabs. I tend to have some shorter branches closer to the ground, 4 or so blocks away from the trunk. Around 1 block above that, I'll increase the distance of the tips of the branches from the trunk to around 9 to 12 blocks away from the trunk. This ensures that when we start placing leaves, there'll be enough air between the leaves and the trunk. When placing branches, I like to make sure before I move up, I get all the areas around the trunk covered with branches so there's not any large open areas. Once I'm happy with the overall shape of the base, I'll begin to move up and into lighter blocks like tuff or motion blocks and mud walls. As far as branches go, for the second part, since I'm using tuff, I'll start out a little more steep, then transition into spruce stairs, slabs, and trapdoors like I said. And to fill the gaps at the tops, I'll use fences and fence gates to close any big holes. Finally, before we add any leaves, I'll fly around and add fences and fence gates to the outer edges of all the branches. We really made these give the effect of smaller branches and I quite like it. Okay, now for the leaves, the hardest part. I'm not going to try to play it down. We both have messed up so many trees by adding too many leaves, and taking them away is surprisingly hard for us. To add on, having 2 or more leaf blocks in parallel touching each other is something I personally avoid, but it's kind of up to personal preference. Alright, I start on the outermost branches, just placing leaves pretty much randomly, some touching the branches, most not. I'll place the leaves in all directions surrounding the branch. I personally usually go from branch to branch, taking frequent looks back to make sure you have the shape and density correct. As far as texturing goes, I like to use around 3 different types of leaves, and I'll go and just make the darker shades on the inner and lower parts of the tree, and as I go up, I'll gradually make it lighter as I go up and out. Finally, I use the lightest blocks like azalea on the top because the sun is probably hitting it most of the day. If the tree is looking a little funny, some common mistakes I've run into are making the branches not big enough and making the stump not proportional to the size of the tree. Okay. Oh, get it? Pretty bad. This oak is pretty big here. Here's an example of a smaller oak. On this guy, I'm having the tree have 2 trunks. This, strat is not really unique to oaks. I highly recommend it using for other trees like birch and aspens. Since it is smaller, I want to use less blocks and more walls and glass and fences to create the trunk and the branches. I pretty much do the same thing as far as the branches go, and just start making a nice base with some lighter blocks, then quickly working up using spruce fences and mud walls. These 2 blocks are cool since they do not connect to each other, which can make for some pretty cool shapes. I can also shape the mud walls a little more using brown or green glass as well as jungle trapdoors because they're the same color as the walls. I treat the leaves the same way, being extra careful to get all of the sides. A common mistake I make is making these trees too skinny on one side and then perfect shape on the other. One final note. I think oak trees are pretty hard and you just have to be patient. The amount of time it took me to get one oak tree was legit probably around 6 to 4 months. So many trees I was not satisfied with just ask Bean.
Yep. So many. So many. Just like the pine tree, the aspen is another tree that is perfect for starting your custom tree journey. As you can see, the aspen is medium tall in height and pretty easy to scale with your world. They can also range in colors depending on the season and location. Aspens in particular are only found in clusters, so I wouldn't build just one lonely aspen. Just like all the other trees, use a reference picture, or 2, or 3, the more the better. Blocks like diorite and pale oak are perfect because they check all the boxes for the necessary blocks like walls, fences, slabs, etc. For the green aspens, I like to use azalea leaves, since the leaves of the aspen are very thin and a lot of light comes through the leaves. Aspens have skinny trunks, so walls and fences are the main blocks I use as the trunk. They're also pretty straight, so it makes your job really easy. All you gotta do is build straight up to your desired height. Don't even stress about making branches, just a few walls and fences will do. A general rule of thumb I like to follow for these types of trees is that I don't place the leaves more than 3 to 4 blocks away from the furthest branch. The first few leaves I place near the bottom are always touching the trunk to give that oval shape. Aspens are pretty cylindrical, so you don't have to think that hard, just build up and keep it roundish. I never place more than 3 blocks touching, otherwise I find the tree looks very dense and fake. Towards the top, make sure to narrow it down and end with 1 or 2 blocks at the very top. Did you know that aspens turn yellow in the fall because their food, the sun, is less available? So they start to break down that green color and begin to turn that signature yellow. And you can have that beautiful fall color in your world. Harnessing your new aspen building ability, gather every yellow block you can think about, yes, even honey, sorry, and use the same technique you used to build the green aspen, but make it yellow. Yellow stained glass panes are my favorite way to create depth and airiness in the leaves. And the translucent honey block is also a welcome sight in terms of creating that airy look. Alright, Aiden's out in the field right now and he's going to show you how to take your trees to the next level.
Yeah, we're out in the field because we are in my forever world. So I have just used a few details here to make this forest feel much more alive and immersive. And here, let me just go down that list. So walking through here, I have just some very common, wildflowers here. I think they're alliums or whatever. The purple one, I think using flowers can be good. Not where like you bone meal it and it's just like random jumble. But if you use like big patches of one specific color to kind of draw the eyes to, it's like a point of interest, some color in a very green and gray and brown place, I think adds quite a bit. And then before the dry grass, I can find some. Yeah, over here. I was using some wheat to kind of break up the green monotony. And, forests have a lot of dead things too. And speaking of dead things, to indicate the passing of time, we have a big fallen tree over here. I feel like it's, really essential to have these kind of lying around. It brings a lot, especially when you're kind of wandering around the woods. Mangrove roots and the muddy mangrove roots, surrounded by the pale moss, got the moss creeping up on the side, and the coarse dirt with some plants growing out of it. I think this is a really great way to give the indication of time passing. Here's another one of those flower patches I got going on. And we got a little bee here hanging out. Pretty cool. But yeah, adding lots of grass and ferns and different kinds of foliage I think is a really good way. And then of course we have like a river, a nice body of water running through here, breaking it up. I see a lot of people using the glass streams too. I think it looks really nice as well. And then over here we have a really colorful coral for some reason. Oh, it's because of the water. And then we have a fallen tree here that allows you to just, if you choose to, meander over here and check out this side of the forest as well. We have tons more rocks over here. Another, dead fallen tree. This one's looking quite a bit older, more rotten. There's no really planks here. And then over here we have another bigger tree here, and using some of the pale oak here. I think it's really nice. And then if we kind of walk through here, it's nice. It's quiet. The new leaves look fantastic, and it's quite a pretty peaceful place to hang out. Also got some of the nether sprouts poking up, maybe acting as some sort of fungus or something. And then if we come over here, I don't know if you guys allow this, but we have some player heads over here. Just nice, some nice features. And then of course we have the forest turtle, and using the firefly bushes. Really, tons of mobs, but makes the ambiance, during the night super nice. Another patch of white flowers here. And honestly, I really like this place. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Here's even another fallen tree.
If you made it this far into the video, we really appreciate it. If you're following along and your trees don't really look the way you want them to look, that's fine. Trees are something organic, and getting the shape that you want takes a lot of time. If you're building a forest, just keep the bad trees. Forests are diverse, and no two trees are the same.
If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to leave a comment. Also, we are creating a very bare bones Discord server, so if you feel like sharing your custom trees or your other builds, we would love to see. We would also love to hang and get to know you guys. Feel free to join, that's down in the description. We also don't know much about Discord, so don't judge too hard. Appreciate it. One last thing before class is dismissed. A lot of footage we used from our survival world, so if you wanted to see more of that, here you go. Link is in the description. Thanks for watching.